And with me is immigration lawyer Max Berger. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Good morning.
Now, this ship is garnering a lot of attention. Do you see any concern with hundreds of new potential refugee claimants landing on our shores in one day?
Not really, because the numbers have to be put into context. Canada, on average, takes in 35,000 refugee claimants a year. Last year, in 2009, the number was 34,000. That averages out to about 100 people a day. So if you look at the volume on this ship, which is just under 500 people, that really comes to what we see in an average 5-day week, every week of the year for the last 2 decades. We can handle this flow.
Max, what is Canada's responsibility in a situation like this?
Well, our international obligations and our Charter of Rights require us to give a refugee hearing to all of the people on that ship that are eligible. So they are going to go through the same procedures that any other of the 35,000 refugee claimants a year go through. For the most part, their claims will be referred to the Refugee Board, and eventually they'll have a refugee hearing to determine whether their claims are legitimate.
And what about claims that there may be people with links to the Tamil Tiger terrorist group on board? How can that be determined?
Well, there is a procedure for holding admissibility hearings to determine whether these people are security risks for being members of the LTTE. So the government will have to demonstrate and the burden of showing that they are members of the Tigers, and eventually the Refugee Board will make a decision on this.
What other criteria will be used to determine who is eligible or ineligible to live in Canada?
The other criteria are whether they have been accepted as refugees in other countries. Usually that's not the case. Whether they have a criminal background, that usually is not the case. For the most part, the vast, overwhelming majority of refugee claimants are eligible to have their cases referred to the Refugee Board for a hearing.
Should we be concerned that this boat may be full of people who bought passage from human smugglers?
Well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's just a fact of refugee flow that legitimate refugees have to often rely on smugglers to get them out of the country where they're being persecuted and get them to Canada. There is just no other way to get them here. So we should not malign or blame the refugee claimants, many or most of whom are legitimate. We can deal with the smugglers, if there are smugglers, according to our Canadian law that is already in place.
How long will it take to process all of these people?
On average, it takes about 18 months to get to a refugee hearing now. So I imagine that would be the ballpark figure that we're looking at. The immediate concern for the refugees is I expect they are going to be detained for some length of time until the government can establish whether or not any of them are connected with the LTTE. And I should add that at this point, all we have are rumors and innuendo. Same thing happened with the ship of 76 Tamils that came here last October. And to this day, 10 months later, there hasn't been any evidence put forward to connect those Tamils to the LTTE.
Now, according to Ottawa's former High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Martin Collicott, Canada accepts about 50% of the people who manage to make it here, whereas other countries usually around 15%. So why are we so accepting?
Well, we're actually less and less accepting. When the Refugee Board was created in 1989, the acceptance rate in the first few years of the board was at 89, 88%, and it's gone steadily downwards. Right now, it averages just under 50%. But I should say, with respect to Sri Lankan Tamils, the acceptance rate has always been high. It's always been in the high 80 percentile range. And so the expectation is that the overwhelming majority of these refugees will be accepted here in Canada.
All right, Max Berger, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.